Ever imagine yourself like right at the center of a scandal? One so big it rocks an entire kingdom.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Well, today we're diving deep into the life of Countess Frances Carr,
Hey,
a woman whose ambition and tangled love life put her right in the middle of 17th century England's juiciest scandals.
wow.
You sent us some excerpts from the Noble Blood podcast about her, and trust me, her story is more captivating than any period drama you've ever seen.
I bet.
If you love history and a good dose of intrigue, well, you've come to the right place.
For sure.
Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more fascinating deep dives like this.
What's truly captivating about Frances Carr's story is that it offers a window into a world where power and privilege often shielded the wealthy from true accountability. But at the same time, it reveals how those very same forces could turn against you in an instant, especially for a woman in a society dominated by men.
Absolutely. Her story is a stark reminder that ambition can be a double-edged sword. And it all begins with a young Frances, just 20 years old, already a countess, but trapped in a marriage that's turned into a nightmare.
Yes, her husband, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, returned from his travels ravaged by smallpox.
Oh, wow.
This was a time when appearances meant everything, and a disfigured husband could significantly impact a woman's social standing and prospects. It's important to understand that annulments were incredibly rare and difficult to obtain back then. They required approval from the highest levels of the church and often involved lengthy investigations and accusations.
So it wasn't just a matter of filing some paperwork and moving on. Frances was facing an uphill battle, both legally and socially. But she was determined to escape this marriage, especially since she had already fallen head over heels for another man, Robert Carr, who, get this, was the king's favorite.
Yes, Robert Carr. To fully grasp the significance of this relationship, we need to understand the role of a king's favorite in the Jacobean era. They weren't just companions, they held immense influence, often advising the king on matters of state and enjoying considerable wealth and privilege. So Frances's love affair wasn't just a personal matter, it had political ramifications.
It's like a real-life Game of Thrones, with love, power, and ambition all intertwined. And let's be honest, Frances wasn't exactly known for her patience. According to the podcast, while waiting for the annulment, she found herself entangled in a rather scandalous incident with a local faith healer named Cunning Mary.
Yes, this incident offers a glimpse into Frances's character and the lengths she was willing to go to achieve her desires. She accused Mary of stealing a valuable ring, but Mary countered with a shocking claim that Frances had actually given her the ring as payment for a rather dark service killing her husband.
Wait, she wanted to hire a hit woman. What does this tell us about Frances? Was she truly desperate enough to resort to such extreme measures? Or was Mary simply trying to deflect blame and save herself?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? While there's no evidence beyond Mary's word to support the claim, it's significant that Mary, a poor woman, was ultimately convicted of theft, while Frances, with her wealth and connections, faced no real consequences.
It does make you wonder about the uneven scales of justice back then, doesn't it? This incident, while disturbing, pales in comparison to the main event. A murder trial that would grip the entire nation and forever tarnish Frances's reputation.
And this is where the story takes a truly sinister turn.
Okay.
The death of Thomas Overbury, Robert Carr's close friend and advisor, would directly implicate Frances and lead to one of the most sensational trials in English history.
Okay, so before we get into the murder trial, let's rewind a bit. Who is Thomas Overbury and why was he so vehemently opposed to Frances and Robert Carr's relationship?
Thomas Overbury wasn't just a friend to Robert Carr. He was his confidant, his strategist, practically his right-hand man. He was brilliant, but he was also known for being blunt and even abrasive at times. He saw Frances as a social climber, a manipulative woman who, in his eyes, would ruin Carr's career.
So he was basically that friend who warns you about your new love interest, but on a much grander, more dramatic scale.
Yes.
And his disapproval wasn't just idle chatter. The podcast mentions that he actually took concrete steps to try and sabotage their relationship.
Absolutely. Overbury, being a man of action, penned a scathing poem titled The Wife, which, while not explicitly naming Frances, was widely perceived as a critique of her character. The poem became a bestseller, further damaging her reputation within the court.
Ouch, that's gotta sting. Imagine being publicly criticized in a poem that everyone's reading. But Overbury didn't stop there, did he?
No, he didn't. He actively worked to block the annulment, pulling strings and calling in favors to delay the process. He truly was a thorn in Frances's side, a constant reminder that her happiness, her very future, was hanging by a thread.
But Frances had some powerful allies of her own, her family, the Howards. And they were not about to let some ambitious advisor derail their plans for their daughter's future.
Indeed, the Howards were a force to be reckoned with. They were well-connected, politically savvy, and incredibly influential within the king's court. They recognized Overbury as a legitimate threat to their plans and decided to neutralize him with a plan so cunning it could rival a Shakespearean drama.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What did they do? I'm all ears.
They used their influence to secure Overbury a prestigious appointment, the ambassadorship to Russia. Now, on the surface, this seems like an incredible honor, but knowing Overbury's devotion to Carr, they understood he would never accept a position that would take him so far away from his friend and his sphere of influence.
So it was a trap, a clever way to manipulate Overbury into making a mistake.
Precisely. By refusing the king's offer, Overbury would commit a serious offense, one that could land him in deep trouble. And that's precisely what happened. Overbury, predictably, refused the ambassadorship, and the Howards, seizing the opportunity, made sure the king perceived this refusal as a blatant act of disrespect.
And what happened to Overbury? Did the king banish him?
Worse. He was imprisoned in the Tower of London, effectively silenced and removed as an obstacle to Frances's annulment. The Howards had won this round.
So, with Overbury out of the picture, Frances's annulment was finally granted, and she was free to marry Robert Carr.
Yes.
A happy ending, right?
Not quite.
Yeah.
Remember, Overbury is still imprisoned in the Tower of London. And just 5 months into his imprisonment, Thomas Overbury died. While it initially appeared to be from natural causes, a deathbed confession would soon reveal a far more sinister truth.
This is where it gets really chilling. So what actually happened to Overbury?
Well, the confession revealed that Overbury had been systematically poisoned while in the tower, and as the investigation unfolded, the trail of evidence would eventually lead back to Frances and Robert Carr, implicating them in a murder plot that would shatter their newfound happiness and send shockwaves through the English court.
This is unbelievable. We got a love triangle, a cunning plan, and now murder. This story has more twists and turns than a maze, and I'm dying to know what happens next.
And you won't have to wait long. When we come back, we'll delve into the details of the murder trial, the shocking verdict, and the surprising twist of fate that awaited Frances and Robert Carr. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.
We left off with quite the cliffhanger. The shocking revelation that Thomas Overbury didn't just die in the Tower of London, but he was murdered, poisoned while supposedly under the protection of the crown.
And this wasn't some impulsive act of passion. The details revealed in the podcast point to a calculated and meticulously executed plan. We're talking about repeated instances of poisoning over a period of time, with various substances like poison tarts and jellies. There's even mention of a fatal enema laced with sulfuric acid.
Oh, those details are certainly chilling. It's hard to imagine the level of malice involved in orchestrating such a gruesome death. But at this stage, it's still just an accusation. How did the investigation unfold? What evidence connected Frances to this horrific crime?
Well, the investigation was a complex web, but several key figures emerged who shed light on the conspiracy. For instance, we have Mr. Elwes, the lieutenant of the tower. While he appeared to try to protect Overbury to some extent, he was ultimately implicated for knowing about the poisoning and failing to prevent it. Then there's Weston, a guard within the tower, who admitted to delivering the poisoned food to Overbury in exchange for bribes.
So they had individuals within the tower itself participating in the plot. It makes you wonder how far this conspiracy reached. But what about the poison itself? Where does it come from?
That's where another intriguing character enters the story, Anne Turner.
Right.
A woman known for her fashionable attire and, shall we say, her entrepreneurial spirit. Remember how we mentioned she was the one who popularized those yellow-dyed ruffs everyone was wearing?
Oh, right. She was like a fashion icon of her time, but also ran brothels on the side. Quite the combination.
Exactly. Well, it turns out Anne Turner was also a close confidant of Frances. During the investigation, it came to light that she had provided information on where to obtain poisons. It's not entirely clear whether she was aware of the specific purpose or the intended victim, but her connection to Frances placed her squarely under suspicion.
So we have a network of accomplices, a method, and a motive that seemingly points back to Frances. How did she and Robert Carr react when the accusations started flying?
Their initial reaction, as you might expect, was to deny any involvement, deflect blame, and attempt to delay the investigation. They tried to leverage their influence to stall the legal process, but the king, despite his fondness for Carr, couldn't simply ignore a murder of this magnitude, especially one with such a high-profile victim and the potential to spark political turmoil.
And let's not forget the public's insatiable appetite for scandal. The idea of a countess implicated in a murder plot would have been the talk of the town. The newspapers, or whatever their 17th century equivalents were, must have been having a field day.
Absolutely. The pressure on the king to take action was immense. Eventually, the case went to trial, and it was media spectacle. People were practically fighting for seats in the courtroom, eager to witness this dramatic showdown.
It's almost hard to fathom the pressure Frances must have felt. Standing trial for murder, with everyone watching, judging, whispering behind their fans. Talk about a fall from grace.
It was a pivotal moment for sure, and according to the accounts, Frances arrived at the trial looking frail and delicate. Most notably, she was heavily pregnant, which added another layer of complexity to the proceedings. People question whether a woman in her condition could truly be capable of such a cold-blooded crime.
It's like something out of a Shakespearean tragedy. A pregnant countess, accused of murder, facing the judgment of her peers. What was the verdict? Did she maintain her innocence?
Surprisingly, no. Frances, against all expectations, pleaded guilty. Historians still debate her motivations for this unexpected plea. Was it a genuine confession, driven by remorse and a desire to take responsibility for her actions? Or was it a calculated move, a desperate attempt to secure leniency from the king, who is known for his occasional displays of mercy?
It's fascinating to consider those possibilities.
Yeah.
Did Robert Carr also face trial?
He did. But unlike Francis, he maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings. Interestingly, the podcast mentions that the king, in a rather desperate attempt to control the situation, wrote letters to Carr urging him to confess and promising a pardon if he did.
Wow, so the king was still trying to protect Carr even after all that had happened. It speaks volumes about the complex power dynamics at play. What happened to Carr's trial? Was he found guilty?
He was, despite his continued denials. But here's where the story takes another dramatic turn. Both Frances, having just given birth to her daughter in prison, and Carr, convicted of involvement in the murder plot, received death sentences. But then, in an act that many considered shockingly lenient, the king commuted their sentences.
Wait, they got away with it. After all the drama, the intrigue, and the cold-blooded murder, they were simply set free.
Well, set free might not be the most accurate description. They were released from prison but stripped of their titles and banished from the king's court. They were allowed to live out their days, but in relative obscurity, a stark contrast to the life of power and privilege they once enjoyed.
It's almost a bittersweet ending, isn't it? A fall from grace, a taste of redemption, and a quiet exile.
And there's one final twist. A touch of irony, you might say. Remember Frances's first husband, Robert Devereux, the one she so desperately wanted to escape? Well, as fate would have it, he was a member of the jury that ultimately condemned her.
No way. That's incredible. Do you think he took some sort of twisted pleasure in seeing his former wife brought low?
It's impossible to know for sure, but one can't help but imagine a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes as the verdict was read. Perhaps he felt a sense of justice, or maybe even a bit of revenge.
It's truly fascinating to consider how history remembers figures like Frances Carr. Is she a villain in this story, or a victim of circumstance? Or perhaps a bit of both?
Yeah, the Noble Blood podcast wisely avoids presenting a simple answer, leaving room for us to ponder the complexities of her character and the moral ambiguities of her story. And that's what makes it so compelling.
I agree. It's not a straightforward tale of good versus evil. It's a story about human ambition, about the allure of power, and about the choices we make when those desires collide with the realities of the world around us.
And it serves as a stark reminder that even in the 17th century, power wasn't absolute. Frances and Robert Carr might have escaped the executioner's axe, but they paid a steep price for their actions. Their fall from grace, their loss of status and influence, that's a powerful reminder that even those born into privilege are not above the law, at least not entirely.
Their story is almost a cautionary tale, wouldn't you say? It shows how the pursuit of power can be a treacherous path, leading to unexpected and often devastating consequences.
Precisely. And it also compels us to examine how societal structures, even centuries ago, shaped our understanding of justice and accountability. Would Frances's fate have been different if she weren't a countess? If she didn't have the protection of her influential family? It's a question worth pondering, not just in the context of history, but also in our own times.
These are questions that resonate even today as we grapple with issues of power, privilege, and social justice in our own world. Frances Carr's story is not just a relic of the past. It's a mirror reflecting our own values, our own understanding of ambition, love, and the price we're willing to pay for them.
It's a story that invites us to delve deeper, to explore the nuances of history and the motivations of those who shaped it. For our listeners, I encourage you to seek out the primary sources, read different historical interpretations, and come to your own conclusions about the key players in this drama.
This deep dive has only scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover, so many layers to this tale of ambition and intrigue. And who knows, maybe you'll uncover a new perspective, a hidden detail that changes your understanding of the whole story. That's the beauty of history. It's a conversation that continues to unfold, inviting us to question, to explore, to keep learning.
Exactly. And until our next deep dive, keep those minds curious and those questions coming.
Thanks for joining us.